Hello friends, this lecture of English literature for class Shastri part 3rd paper 1st. Today we will study of the famous poet G.M. Hopkins' poem The Sea and the Skylark. First of all, we will talk about the famous poet G.M. Hopkins. Here is the picture of G.M. Hopkins. Hopkins was born on 28th July 1844 and died on 8th June 1889. He was the leading poet of Victorian poets. He was educated Balliol College, Oxford. He was a poet of much originality and skillful innovator in rhythm. He wrote a number of short poems which were collected after his death by Robert Bridge. Hopkins today is regarded as one of the major poets in the realm of English poetry. Although his influence is more technical than spiritual, yet his acute sensibility to beauty, his original metaphor, and his sincerity cannot be denied. He was very sensitive to natural beauty. He was equally sensitive to its destruction. Ricks called Hopkins the most original poet of the Victorian age. Hopkins is considered as influential as T.S. Eliot in initiating the modern movement in poetry. Then we come on the discussion of the poem The Sea and the Skylark. The Sea and the Skylark is a sonnet. As you all know that sonnet is a short poem of 14 lines. This sonnet was written in 1877 in a seaside town. Hopkins lived there about 3 years. The theme of the poem. The theme of the sonnet is a contrast between the life giving purity of nature and the sordidness of the civilization that man is creating. The town mentioned in the sonnet is Ryle in Wales, but the sonnet is not an attack particularly on the town or the people who lived in this town. It is general meditation on nature and man occasioned by a particular scene. Main ideas of the poem. The poem was originally titled Walking by the Sea. In the sonnet, the sea and the skylark are described in the octave part. Then, in the sestet part, these two are contrasted with man. The mood of the poet is joyous in the octave, where he describes the natural sounds of the sea and the skylark singing. But in the sestet part, the mood of the poet changes and he becomes deeply pessimistic. In the sonnet, the poet criticizes the human beings. The sonnet ends with deeply sense of loss at the thought. Now we discuss the text of this poem. So in the here in the beginning lines of this poem, here the poet is walking by the seaside. He hears the sound coming from opposite directions. These sounds are as old as the word itself. The poet says that it is seemed that these sounds will never be ended and will remain forever. From the right side, he listens the noise of sea, which at high tide strikes against the shore and rushes towards the ramps and then recreates, and this process continues. This process will continue as long as the moon continues to wane and wax because the tides are controlled by the moon. Then we come on the next four lines. In these lines, the poet tells About the song of the skylark, from the left side, the poet hears the sound of the skylark singing as he leaves the earth and flies into the sky. The Skylark song is always the same. It seems a musical score which may be compared to a skein of wool that is successively unwound as he sings in the sky. And when he returns to the earth, the song is as fresh as the one before. The skylark pours out music without effort, and yet he pelts his phrase song with continuous effort till he has split and spent all and there is nothing left. So, in these lines, the poet describes about the skylark. Then we come on the sustained part of this poem. In these lines, the poet shows that the two natural sounds of the sea and the skylark, which are putting to shame the town of Ryle, where life is shallow and devoid of vitality, these sounds of nature, because of their purity, rise far above the sordid and confused human sounds of the town. The poet says that human beings are supposed to be pride of creation and the honored lords of the whole world, but they have now lost the joy and charm of the earth when all things were in their prime. Now, the static and dynamic aspect of the human beings are in process of decay and disintegration. This process will lead people to the state of dust which awaits them in death and which recalls man's original state of slime. So, like this, the poet ends, and here the poet totally criticizes the human beings. So finally, we come on the conclusion that thus we can say that Hopkins is very clear towards his thought that human beings are going towards their last destiny. So here we think that uh, Hopkins' sensibility to beauty and it seems to be